off, I think, people will keep coming in as we go, and we're going to be recording this as well. So yeah, I think I just want to welcome everybody to I guess the December edition of the Tokyo Cybersecurity Meetup. I think like this was the quickest turnaround from our last event, so this is really good. We're really thankful for our amazing panel today from our friends at Microsoft, Allan and Samuel, who I call Soto. Actually, I think for everybody in the room, for me this is quite nice, because looking back, we've had this community and we've been doing these events for since around, like, I think June 2018. So it's been quite a while, and Soto was actually one of the original attendees from the meetup. So to see from us just having like beers in Otemachi with like all the other security people in Tokyo, and then now to your new role at Microsoft is just like it's amazing, right? Like it's very organic. Everybody that we've had on the panel, or like having Thomas join as a co-host, and Yuko as our Japanese co-host, is all because of the community, and this is why we do this. So just really thankful for everybody in the room who there's always new people who come in. And Soto's been an amazing friend in the industry for a while, so really happy to have him lend his time and introduce us to Allan as well. So yeah, so I think like just for me to stop talking a bit, just encourage everybody to ask questions at any time. There's a Q&A option for the attendees, so you can use that. You can ask questions even through any point in the webinar. So we encourage you guys to do that. We'll also have some time towards the end to focus on the questions, but I think without further ado, I'm sure this is going to be a really, really good session and an interesting discussion. So I will kind of take a sidestep and give it to give the the figurative mic to Thomas. So yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Gino, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon here in Tokyo, or wherever you are in the world. Very happy to have Allan and Samuel from Microsoft joining us today. We're covering quite an interesting topic. I know there'll be some crossovers of other topics and discussions we've had in the past, but I think coming from the perspective of Microsoft and the combined experiences of Allan and Samuel, this will be a very interesting discussion. So without further ado, I'd love to hear more about the backgrounds of Allan and Samuel. So Allan, if you could kick off and give us a bit of background about yourself and how you came to be working in cybersecurity, and what your role and responsibilities are at Microsoft at the moment.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So my name is Allan Johnstone. I'm a consultant with Microsoft. I'm based in New Zealand, but I cover the whole Asia Pacific Japan area. I work in our detection and response team, which is a focus on incident response and helping customers after they've been attacked. I've been in the IT industry for like 20 years. I've worked across a variety of sectors: defense, aerospace, aviation, banking, finance. Recently, I worked for Dell, and prior to Microsoft, I was at NTT for 5 years. I've been at Microsoft for almost 3 years, and I kind of moved into security around about 10 years ago, when an organization I was working with was hit by ransomware and viruses, and I was the guy on the ground, and I picked it up and I ran with it, and I never stopped. So, Samuel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Gino, and thank you, Thomas, for inviting us here. I'm just glad to be able to reach out to the community and kind of just say hi. And so I've been in the industry more than 20 years, basically all the way from, I was actually in the US military for a bit. I did my own company, then I worked in Japan also in multiple industries. You talk manufacturing, life insurance, now at Microsoft too. And I've been in multiple roles, be it from configuration management to operations to security, all that. With that said, right now working for the compromise recovery practice, which is it's very exciting because you get to see a lot of things. You get to see the time when an environment is on fire, basically everything's falling apart and people are kind of going crazy. There's somebody here, and we go in and help them and things like that. So it's a very exciting time. And even to say, both Allan and I, we actually participated for some time in the Tokyo Olympics. We supported their team, and we work with a lot of different companies, supporting together people from all over the world. It was an exciting time just to make sure that that Olympics stays basically online. Because if you think about it, it was the first Olympics that almost nobody was there. Everybody was just watching it, right? So the IT part and preventing those attacks is very important. So it was an exciting time, and I gotta say, it's a fun ride so far. Thank you for having me here.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think, I mean, both those backgrounds sound very interesting. And Allan, you mentioned something that you were dealing with a ransomware attack almost 10 years ago. It must be really, really interesting from your perspective to see how that ransomware, I guess it's an industry now, has evolved since then. I don't know if you have any initial comments about that.
Absolutely. So first ransomware started coming out in 2013, and it's what we call, commodity malware, where it was untargeted ransomware. It came in via email, you click an attachment, and it would, just try and encrypt what it could, your local drives, or if you're unlucky, it encrypt your network shares and things. But the evolution of ransomware from like commodity malware to human operated ransomware over the last 3 years has been spectacular. The pace of change is rapid. We recall, in 2017, Pecha or the NotPetya and the WannaCry outbreaks, where you had wormable ransomware. But in 2019, we started seeing human-operated ransomware, where there was actually a determined human person at the other end of the keyboard within your network, looking for things to encrypt and data to exfiltrate with the aim of causing the most damage to your business as possible. So it wasn't enough that you had to, stop it with antivirus software. You needed to look at how your identity was protected, because the frontier isn't, like malware, it's identity, it's control of identity. So it's much more difficult these days, and ransomware capabilities are improving at a really quick rate.
Wow, that's very very scary on the one hand, and I guess on the other hand, it's also good for your business overall, given the widening threat landscape. Taking a step back, so ransomware, I'm sure everyone on this call knows is one of the big issues at the moment, and one of the more common and more frightening types of cyber attacks. But taking a step back from a general perspective, what do you see as some of the most common causes for breaches at companies at the moment? And what are you both seeing? I mean, Samuel, what are your takeaways from the cybercrime landscape at the moment?
So basically what we come to see a lot is you basically see a lot of people doing the common things. It's kind of like repeat of history in a way when it comes to security. You're seeing factors such as phishing. Phishing is becoming more efficient in criminals. Also social engineering, getting like you sometimes get, for example, North Korea will create APTs that will have like people posting as security researchers and try to reach people. That's quite posted all over the news. And also typical things like lack of patches, things exposed to the internet, and basically that's how a lot of attackers get in. One thing is in particular we see is that a lot of people focus a lot in trying to do like follow a framework and not think like an attacker. So that I try to go to this checklist, and they tend to miss gaps. It's not a very dynamic approach, because when you see frameworks and infrastructures and checklists, right, they kind of tend to lag behind what criminals are doing now, right? So that we typically see that. And Allan, you want to add something else to that too?
Yeah, sure. So everything you said is entirely valid and very true. But what we're also seeing now, particularly in the last 6 months, is attack groups attacking managed service providers and support companies. So why bother hacking 100 companies directly when you can hack the company that provides managed services for them and compromise them and use them as a backdoor into all their clients? That happens all the time. Particularly cloud managed services Companies have moved to Azure or AWS or Google Cloud, and very often they delegate authority to their cloud platforms to someone who manages them on their behalf. So if you can take out a cloud managed provider, you can take out dozens or hundreds of clients at the same time. And we're seeing APT groups doing this, particularly from China. Particularly Microsoft published a white paper this week on a group we're calling Nickel, who's funded, we believe, by the Chinese government, and they've targeted managed service providers as a method of attacking, and they're looking to steal data rather than ransomware. And Russian groups as well, Nebelium, etc., who are targeting government organizations, often via like exchange vulnerabilities, again with the aim of staying quiet, causing no disruption, and just reading emails and stealing information that's useful to the Russian state. I guess it's worth pointing out here, there's two groups of attackers. There's the financially motivated gangs who will ransomware and extort, and then there's the nation states who look to steal information. And there's a little crossover between them. There's some nation states who look to extort money because they're broke, like North Korea, who they need a foreign currency. So you'll see nation states from places like North Korea looking to extract, financial gain via ransomware.
The same way, we're also seeing, and you see this a lot also when an environment is compromised. You can see it in the way they move and what they do. Like to piggyback on what Allan was saying. So typically the nation states will be kind of staying silent. They don't want to get catch to be able to exfiltrate as much data as possible. It's the typical like modern espionage. Instead of sending somebody and blending in, they get into your systems without you noticing, and they stay there for a long time. And then you have the criminal ones that basically that's an entire market. You go into the dark, deep web, there's even folks creating services, like I call it crime as a service, right? Like they'll do ransomware things that are already prepackaged, and people that have limited knowledge in IT can just launch these attacks and ransom your whole system. So it's typically the speed and how much damage they do. And nation states tend to try to minimize the damage because they want to stay there as much as possible.
I think that's a great point. Just to touch on what you said about specialization. It's no longer one group performing all the activities. You have specialization, and the capabilities have grown exponentially. There's billions and billions of dollars have been made in profits from cybercrime. And much as I'd like to think all this money spent on Dachas and speedboats in the Crimea, the reality is the money flows back into capability and service. So these are big businesses. They'll have Jira boards, they'll be running agile processes to improve their software and the delivery capabilities. So you'll have phishing as a service. You'll have organizations who breach and obtain administrative access, and then they'll sell pre-cracked domains to someone who deploys the ransomware. It's become a very niche business. It's no longer someone doing all. Forget the guy in the hoodie in the basement, typing away in the green screen. It's big business with people and specialists in these roles, and they're highly skilled people.
Yes, indeed. With that said, one final thing I wanted to add on this part is that another thing we see sometimes is like even nation states, if they're being discovered, they'll notice. That's one of the things we do when we try to help our customers. We try to split the communications, because if the bad guy finds out what we're doing, they might get very aggressive and destroy the environment, drop something really nasty there, and get really bad really quick.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone saw it. There was a ransomware group this week who published screenshots of Teams chats about the incident response that was trying to deal with them, and they published it on the web just to show that they knew they'd been caught.
Yes.
Wow, yeah, sounds quite a scary environment, given that you have the APT groups, advanced persistent threat actors from hostile nation states, and very sophisticated criminal organizations acting like multinationals with processes. You mentioned something quite interesting about this proliferation of crime as a service. And before we go into how you mitigate these types of attacks and how how you would recommend the response, I wanted to see if you're seeing a lot of this being automated now, or is it still very a manual type process? Like how much of these attacks, whether they're coming from APTs or criminal groups or even very advanced or highly skilled individuals, how much of this is being automated with machine learning tools and other types of means to achieve at a more scalable level?
I think a lot of the initial penetration scanning, is automated with machine learning, such like it happens at scale. But the actual deployment of ransomware and the exfiltration of data is very much hands-on. It's human-driven. Key thing to call out is that everyone talks about ransomware, but ransomware is a symptom, not a disease. The disease is a loss of administrative control, failure to protect identity. Ransomware is visible, but what's invisible and always happens at the same time is data theft. So even if you can protect against ransomware and have the ability to recover from ransomware quickly, they're still stealing your data, which is devastating. So to look back to your question, it's very much still manually hands-on for the high-value tasks, and the low-value tasks are somewhat automated.
Yes, exactly. If it is something like a criminal that they just want to get a quick payday, you see it automated. Basically, it comes down to that. If it is something that is very targeted and requires a long time and planning, and it's like a high pay, usually nation states, you see it more of a manual. Because it gets more into how they evade defenses and detection and all that, which it requires a little bit more hands touching and customization for the target.
Yeah, low value stuff like crypto mining is absolutely automated. Just throw a million crypto miners over domain, but the high value stuff's hands on.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, no, that's interesting food for thought, for sure. And maybe this is kind of an obvious question, but when it comes to the impacted organizations themselves from these different types of cyber attacks, Allan, you mentioned there's some which are more espionage, or the objective of the attacker is to try and steal some information, and then the other types of attacks which are more directed towards destroying or information or financial extortion. I mean, what are the impacts to these organizations beyond just the financial aspects? What do you see from, I guess, what would be some of the customers and clients that you deal with?
Well, the impact can be devastating. I mean, I worked on a ransomware incident earlier this year, which was a hospital which was taken entirely offline in the middle of a COVID outbreak. They had somewhere around 700 servers, all of which were taken offline. The patient records were wiped and later sold on the internet. So it's a direct loss of service, but there's a psychological impact of it, where it damages the trust that people have in organizations that are victims. And this is unfortunate because, I don't want to say it's not the victim's fault, but it's wrong to blame victims in these situations. So recovery from a cyber attack can be fast. You can bring back your servers and your data, but your reputation in the community and the wider country can be damaged severely. And also it damages staff as well. There's a psychological impact on staff where like admins have been doing a good job and they feel they've been working hard, can feel quite violated and upset that their networks have been penetrated by attackers. Again, staff often leave after malicious attacks. It's very common to see high staff turnover where people leave and go to other organizations after they've been hacked. I think it all goes to trust and faith in organization.
Yes, very much. For example, to give a more practical kind of example, so if you have a financial company, right, that the moment they get hacked and that becomes public news, because in many cases they have to, by law, publicize this depending on the country, basically nobody else wants to do business sometimes with them. They become kind of nuclear. Nobody wants to touch. So basically it's impacting the growth, any future partnerships, things like that. If you're talking manufacturing, for example, somebody extracting your data, you're basically losing that market advantage, right? Yeah. So
yeah, I always compare the security function to being like a goalkeeper. So I used to be a goalkeeper in hockey, and whenever you really hard, you try not to let any goals in, but as soon as you let it go, and the whole team blames you, you're persona non grata. Whereas the person who's striking, they get to score the goals. If they don't score a goal, nobody blames them. That's just an analogy based on Allan's point about those poor admins that have to take the rap. So based on this, I want to ask kind of a two-part question. So one is, what are the main reasons why a lot of these organizations are getting owned? And also, once they are owned, what are some of the mistakes they make which enable these breaches to get out of control? So I don't know, Samuel, if you want to pick up that point first.
So if I'm gonna summarize it, basically it comes down to lack of preparation. How the reason why they failed to protect from the breach. I mean, the question you also got to ask is not if, it's when, right? Because no matter how strong you are, eventually you may get breached. That's just that it changes the landscape. But a big thing we see in many companies, it tends to be a disconnect between the basically what's happening on the ground floor. Imagine that there's the leadership is getting an image of what's needed and what's happening versus what the ground is doing. You could imagine of it like a war, right? Like what the troops are in the foxhole experiencing versus the generals on the tent, kind of, or people in like all the way in the capital, right, making decisions. So there tends to be a different perception. And with that said, there tends to be less of a focus on security many times, or even in IT management practices and the maturity of these processes. There's also a lack of, with that comes also a lack of direction of like what areas should be the focus for the team, be it not only the company as a whole, but also the IT team. For example, some companies will try to do their internal thing, everything. Other ones who take kind of like a back seat and become project managers and let the hire a contractor to do all the things and no oversight, instead of trying to focus on certain areas that their internal team is good at, and then basically outsourcing the parts that they're not good at. Another part that we've seen is basically people do things in a certain way, right? We're creatures of practice, comfort, right? We get used to doing something and we know it and it works, and we want to make things keep it simple. So sometimes people don't change, they don't challenge this. For example, sometimes we go into environments in which there's a script that we find, that a batch file for something that was created like 15 years ago. And now there's a function to automate this in the OS or some other way, right? That is more secure. And maybe that new solution or way came out like 8 years ago, but nobody even tried to challenge it or even attempt or test it or anything like that. And so opening holes, right, in your security. There's also the market changes, right? The leadership is not seeing what the IT really needs in security and operations. And then they also have the demands from the market to stay competitive. So then all these demands come down, like quick changes. And that just creates a lot of like, there's lack of enough team in the areas they actually need a specialization in certain areas. There's not even proper configuration manager. There's no proper patching, a lot of technical debt, privilege creeping all over. So it's like, it's all that disconnect, I would say. And that's like the key there, the disconnect in communication and decision making. And Allan, could you talk a little bit more about like how it goes, right? How it goes out of control.
So in terms of mistakes that companies can make, what I'd say is the worst thing companies do is panic. There's a bit of a saying here, never lie, never deny. It's like politics. You only have one chance to tell the truth up front and set the narrative of what's happening to your customers and to communicate to the wider industry. Companies who downplay things and lie and say unexplained incident, they go into bad situations. Companies who overpromise return times without making any basis in fact on it have problems. I worked a ransomware incident earlier this year where it was a large public sector organization that performed a critical service. So it was national news, it was front page on the newspapers, it was on the TV news every night. And the CEO came out on the Tuesday of the attack and said, everything will be back online on Friday morning. And it was patently a nonsense. It was absolutely impossible. They had no infrastructure at all. And he got fired at the end of this. So the worst thing companies can do is panic and lie and try and spin things. The key thing to do is stay calm, document everything, and engage professional help if you don't have it, and not to make hasty decisions. There's a phase called containment that comes before eradication. In a containment phase, what you're looking to do is identify the scope of the attack. Now, if it's a ransomware attack that's been devastating, then you kind of understand it really quickly. But for other organizations where you've seen an APT or someone in the environment, what you're trying to do is get a handle of the exact scope of the engagement and how far they've penetrated, document the tools, the processes, the techniques, write everything down, and when you're confident, you can perform an eradication step and move into compromise recovery and look to take them out of the environment. The companies that do best when they're attacked are the companies who have a plan. I can't stress this enough. If you don't have a cyber incident plan, that you're not testing in a kind of tabletop exercise every 6 months, you're going to be in trouble. Companies need a plan, and the plan needs to cover organizational things like when it happens, who's in charge of communications, what happens to my change control process. Normal change control processes don't work in fast-moving incidents, so you need to be able to do faster change, but at the same time, maintain your rigor and documentation. Who's got the ability to spend money? Who do I engage? Who are my support partners? The companies that do best are the ones with plans because they can execute a plan. When you have to start thinking, oh my God, what do I do when you've been hacked? You're already in trouble.
Yes.
It's a good segue into my next question is, and the topic of this discussion, which is, okay, so what do you do next? What is a compromise recovery process, and how long does this usually take? So, you know, organizations been owned and they call professionals such as yourselves. What do they do? How long does it take? What's the process? If you could talk us through that would be great. So maybe Samuel, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so basically, I could talk from the perspective of Microsoft. Basically, we have both services. Like we do incident response, and we also have compromise recovery. Usually, a company will call us, basically Microsoft, and say, you know, we believe that we've been compromised, right? And we'll go ahead and do some checks, or teams to do some checks, and determine if there's further support needed from or incident response team DART, or even like depending on how bad is the environment, we may the compromise recovery security practice may need to jump right away in and kind of bring that up, right, that environment, so you can at least stay in business. But your typical scenario, you get an adversary there or you suspect. The DART will go in for Microsoft, right? They'll do their investigation and they'll provide us some information, which at the same time, we'll use that information for compromise to focus our compromise recovery efforts. Our typical engagement for at least what we do is about 6 weeks. We aim, but it could change depending on how big the environment is. And the main things that we want to get out of there is basically educate the customer on best practices, the things that they're doing wrong, right? Not pointing fingers, but kind of try to spread that knowledge, right? Or how to do things securely. We try to clean up all that technical debt, at least help the customer identify and clean up all that technical debt, and implement proper segregation. While we're decreasing that surface of attack, we're creating segregation. Because one of the things that we do on our efforts or engagements is we focus heavily on the identity management systems. That's, if you think about identity, is the crown jewels of your environment. Somebody owns that, they own everything. And that's what most attackers go after. They try to mimic hatches, or they try to mimic some kind of attack, kind of account, try to get the privilege and try to move laterally in the environment and then try to escalate. So if we can keep only the certain small amount of people from keep that group that can access that identity management systems to like a bare minimum, that's a big win for any organization. And that's what we try to do really quick. And once we set up that foundation, we kick the bad guy out. Basically, we set up this stage event in which we say, okay, we turn off the lights and kick that bad guy out, kind of deal. We do all this while segregating our communications, because as I mentioned earlier, if the bad guys find out what we're doing, they could just destroy the environment. You don't want that, right? So, and with that said, Allan, do you care to speak a little bit more also about the incident response process that comes before compromise recovery?
Yeah, sure. So incident response comes before CR normally, but not always. An incident response is an engagement where you're looking to determine the presence of an adversary within the environment, potentially identify an APT group, and look at the tools, techniques, and processes they've used, and determine the critical vulnerabilities that need to be fixed, immediately. So this is, the house is on fire. How did it get on fire, and how are we going to put it out? So in an IR instance, we'll use Microsoft has some custom tools used just in IR processes. which we would deploy into the environment, and we perform deep scans, and then we harvest some artifacts and perform digital forensics and potentially reverse engineering malware if it's a zero-day thing that nothing's been seen before. So we'll take the malware and give it to a specialist who will, analyze it and get the code. And we use this obviously to update security definitions and such like. And then once we know what's happening, we'll hand over to the compromised recovery team.
Great. Sorry, go ahead.
So one key thing that I want to say here too is that when a lot of people think security, right, and compromised recovery, they think that there's like a fixed formula. But while there's certain things that you can control and eliminate the variables, there's other things like, depending on how the actor is, they may be very flexible in changing their techniques. And there's things that you actually need people that, there's not something that you may not be able to find written somewhere, and you won't find indicators of compromise all the time the same, right? There's some actors change. So I want to leave that in there, because some people may think that as long as they have this checklist and done these things, they're good. And please don't think that. Always be dynamic and always learn.
Yeah, and to give, I guess it takes some of what you said and bring it to life. Are there any case studies you can actually share with, maybe not naming names of particular organizations, and any in Japan that you can talk about as well, just to kind of give us an idea of this step by step, and provide some real life examples?
We're really not allowed to ever name customer names. So even within Microsoft, we don't know customer names with each other. I know the code name is Samuel's project, but I don't know who the customer is. So we create ridiculous names like, Leaping Dolphin or Imperial Layman. They're generated back because they're all ridiculous, and we live with code names. So to use an example, I worked on a project last year that always sticks in my mind. It was a financial services organization in Indonesia. They were based, but they had operations all over East Asia, including Japan. We got engaged when they determined they'd been compromised and some data had been exfiltrated. So what we did was we did an IR process. So we start trying to recreate the attacker's path through the environment and follow the breadcrumbs. So any investigation starts with a piece of data, because they don't call us when nothing's happening. So we start with, something's happened. Either they discovered something in the logs that was unusual, or they discovered, something visible, there was a disruption to service. So in this instance, we determined the attacker had begun the attack process by randomly scanning, a targeted scan of this organization's external IP addresses from a source IP in the People's Republic of China. This is not attribution, we do not attribute. It's just there's a lot of data centers there. So you see a text coming from China or from the Netherlands, bizarrely. I don't know why, or from the US. Anyway, so they scanned the organization's IP addresses and determined there was a vulnerable VPN software by, I think it was a Fortinet thing, that had been flagged as being vulnerable 6 months before, 9 months before, and allowed via a direct traversal attack to steal clear text passwords. So the attacker was able to steal VPN passwords, and from there they moved into the internal environment with a low privileged user account. They were able to escalate to higher privileged user account because the user account also had an admin account using the same password. And from there, they moved through what we call tier 1 servers, the application servers, the database servers, and moved all the way up to domain controllers. And they had effective control of the environment and the root forest within an hour and a half. And this is a major organization. I think they've got 25,000 employees, and they were gone in a couple of hours. And at that point, the attacker went quiet and did nothing for, I think, 4 or 5 weeks. They slowly built their way through the environment, building additional persistence mechanisms, taking over more accounts, installing like backdoors into the environment and software. They dropped some web shells, C2 channels using things like Cobalt Strike and beaconing. And then they deployed some payload at which point they were noticed and they were caught, at which point we come in and we have to start, determining what's happened and taking back control in a structured fashion without, being too noisy and triggering, alerts that the attacker is going to burn the environment to the ground. It was a very difficult project because of the way things work sometimes in Indonesia and the ability to operate at speed and to procure things. There's language and cultural issues sometimes as well. But we got through it and we got some really good results for the customer.
Sounds like a very interesting case study, and just illustrates how quickly and such a devastating impact on an organization can take place. Samuel, do you have any other case studies you can share?
So Allan tends to see the more exciting stuff, right, before it gets to me, and I'm kind of like he's in the private investigator third eye, right, trying to discover, and I'm more like I come the janitor and I clean the mess, right. That said, we tend to find really odd stuff. It tends to be people maybe get complacent. I've seen things like DCs being used as a jump server, which is like, come on, guys. Put in all kinds of like odd roles on a DC. We see that quite common actually, like people overloading their domain controllers with web server protocols, using them for everything under the sun. Of course, I mentioned using old scripts that we find. People like we find customers sometimes using having a bash shell that backs up like their GPOs and their DNS and things like that, and we're like, why? We find even situations. I've been in customers that they have AD, but at the same time they're using Lotus nodes for their identity management, and nobody's overseeing each. And there's like this whole mess of they'll have like thousands and thousands of user accounts that they don't know what they're for. We find all kinds of. It's hard to put them all in a box, right? We always find this kind of. So actually, it's easier to go to the customer many times and we say, okay, so this is all the mess we found. Who should be actually people managing your system? We're gonna clean this rest of the mess up because you gotta have some control here. And sometimes we go to customers that will have something like even a lot of accounts, like hundreds of accounts with no password set. It's a lot. We find all kinds of stuff. It's hard to pinpoint one particular situation.
Yeah, I mean, touching that, I've seen some horrific things. I saw an organization which was a bank that effectively had 6,500 domain admins because they didn't understand how nesting of groups worked properly. And every client-facing terminal in the branches was effectively running as domain admin. I've seen TeamViewer and VNC on domain controllers exposed to the internet because managed service providers found it easy to get in that way. We see often a managed service provider, sometimes several of the clients are popped in very short succession. And the suspicion it's a managed service provider, but you can never really prove it. Some really strange. It's not because people are doing things wrongly. They just don't understand, and they do things that are easy in order to let them do the job. It's like when you're installing the application and the vendor says the service account needs to be domain admin, and it absolutely doesn't. And, if a vendor ever tells you the service account for the application needs to be domain admin, you need to get a new vendor. But vendors do tell customers that, and when they do it, it works. So everyone's really busy and they move on. So a large organization should have, like, in my opinion, less than 5 domain admin equivalents, but it's not unknown to see dozens or hundreds. The protection of identity is the core of everything we do here, because in order to deploy ransomware or to exfiltrate data, you require a level of administrative control. If you don't protect identity with like dedicated admin accounts that are kept secure and only ever logged into high value tasks, if your domain admin accounts log into the same workstation where you're surfing the internet at lunchtime, then I can't help you. It's going to be a bad outcome. So we encourage customers to have dedicated clean keyboards, like we call it a PAW, a privileged access workstation, and clean keyboards for high value tasks. If you protect identity, you're going to be in a much better state than 99% of customers out there.
Yes. With that said, actually, many companies, right? Even our own. I'll speak for Microsoft, right? But they offer proactive services. So instead of just spending a lot of money after you got basically your environment total, you can actually pay somebody to go and see it. It differs from what the people typically think of this like a penetration test, which is not. It's more of like a kind of housekeeping, seeing what you're doing wrong, and maybe even depending on how in depth you can actually be looking for active threat actors hiding in your environment that you don't even know about.
Yeah,
they do
Microsoft
offer services like that.
Yeah,
And it's more than half. It's much cheaper, not only for the actual service, but actually on overall, right? Your the branding of your company, the impact of your company, lost business, all that. So if you had the time, I would recommend for everybody attending here, please contact one of these security companies. You can call us if you want, and they have these practice services. Please do. That's one of the things. That's one of the key things, because I could tell you follow this listing here, follow this framework here. Yeah, that's foundational, but nothing beats actually having people that hunt for this stuff and look for this stuff and do it on a daily basis to actually look at your environment and tell you, this is not as effective as you're feeling it is.
Absolutely. I mean, I've encountered numerous companies where the management couldn't afford $100,000 to mitigate something, yet they could find $5 million to fix it after it'd been ransomware.
Yes.
It's cheaper to fix it up front. It really is. It's not a question of if it's going to happen. It's when it's going to happen. You may not be interested in cyber attacks, but cyber attacks are interested in you.
It sounds like a saying.
So we've got a lot of questions coming in on the Q&A. Thanks everyone for posting those. I just have one final question from my side before I get into the questions in the Q&A. So what do you see some of the trends in the IR and CR space? Like how is that evolving? What are some of the new practices and approaches to doing IR and CR? I mean, whether it's at Microsoft or generally, what are you seeing out there?
So, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Companies are leveraging the power of the cloud and big data. So Defender capabilities is increasing quickly. Cloud-powered SIEMs like Sentinel or other things like that, with automated injection of threat intelligence feeds, really improve organizations' ability to collect and respond. And machine learning can identify alerts and spot incidents early. But the key thing is, someone's got to be looking at console. Collection does not equal detection, and in many instances, the attacker's initial actions and reconnaissance are there in the logs, but no one looked at them. So yeah, cloud and big machine learning can spot patterns earlier. That's what I see. Sam, sorry.
Yes. So piggybacking on what Allan was saying, yes, cloud. So you have a lot of companies. So you have either the ones that are very, especially you see in finance, that are heavy on prem, and they're starting to see a benefit of moving to the cloud, and they're moving right. So they need more visibility. So you notice a lot of the movement, not only in Microsoft products, in other company products too, in security, is to see all these other clouds and give you like a one pane of glass. So it's a big move into how to secure that. At the same time, how to catch all that shadow IT, because many times companies go into the whole, they spend into many clouds, and then they see it's really expensive, and they try to get everything to one, right? And they have all these shadow ITs, identities left behind. So that's something else that we're looking into, like how to track all that, right? And with that said, when you're talking about different platforms, you're also talking about DevOps, right? You see in the news all the time password leaks in DevOps platforms. They drop something in GitHub with all the passwords, things like that. And even IoT, that's like the hot trend right now. A lot of companies are moving their factories into more automated fashion to reduce the amount of people in the factory. So that's also a prime target to get to an adversary getting there and do exfiltration or even damage or even stop your business, right? Especially manufacturing, especially in APAC, you see it a lot. So that's another area that we're looking into to expand.
IoT is huge. It's such a big growth area now, and it's so dangerous.
It is.
From power plants being targeted to mass transportation systems, IoT keeps me up at night awake. It terrifies me.
On top of all the other horror stories that you described. It's IoT adds to your nightmares.
IoT is definitely a nightmare scenario for me. Yeah, I think about back to 2005 and the Iranian Stuxnet incident, where an unnamed threat actor, who was probably the Mossad, took out the Iranian nuclear power plants with a virus and took out the centrifuges which enriched uranium. The power plants all over the world, potentially a malicious actor, a nation state could target, and it's loss of life stuff. It's moved from being a business issue to being a national security issue, and it needs to be treated as a national security issue at a nation state level, I believe. I don't think governments can do enough here. They do work on it, but I think more needs to be done.
Yes, we could actually have a whole session on IoT, honestly, Thomas. It's one of the things you see a lot is they'll target like when you're talking OT and IoT, there's like security panels. Security is basically the machinery that checks the parameters for security in your system. And you see attacks into those systems because they're very fragile when you're talking OT environments, especially OT is not like your typical IT in which you can do changes or anything. They're very fragile environments and you can rarely take them down. So it's a different approach altogether. You have to kind of be listening and things like that. So that's a whole topic and quite interesting.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion for another panel discussion we should do in the new year. No, thanks so much, both Allan and Samuel, for taking my questions. Now we're going to try and flip it over to a lot of the questions we have in the Q&A. So apologies if I don't get to all of them. I'm just going to go for one I thought was quite interesting. So I think it was Allan or Samuel, one of you mentioned the concept of having a clean keyboard. I think it was Allan. So we have a question about what does this exactly mean, a clean keyboard?
I'll let Samuel take this one. It's one of his strong topics.
So clean keyboard, right? So think of it this way. You have your crown jewels, right? Your identity management system. Your identity managed system, you want to make sure who can get into that system, right? You don't want to just let anybody print and create identities how they feel, right? So you have identities, you segregate who can log into that system, but how do you know that somebody's not actually stealing, a bad actor's not stealing those credentials as they hack to those credentials or anything like that? So that's when you get into the actual paw. You have an environment that you trust the whole software, where it came from, and you actually close the most common vectors. Like it wouldn't get emails, you won't be able to browse the internet with it, a proper one. It's properly patched, it's properly isolated, that if there's anything that manages the system, it's gonna be stuff that is on a different level of management. And when you're talking about Microsoft, the way we do things, we do this what we call a tier model, in which we do like a tier 0 for all your identity stuff, tier 1 for your business applications, and tier 2 for anything users, their systems, printers, help desk, things like that. And each one of the systems will have a different administrator. So a poll will be set up to just handle that level, that tier, and only that tier. And if one level gets compromised, ideally we put a lot of controls along with the poll to prevent escalation further. That's part of the things we do on our service.
Okay, great. And another question from the Q&A that I'd like to ask. So are MSPs, managed service providers, an increasing vector of attack? And do you find organizations violating their own policies or admin controls and not using frameworks like ISO 27001?
Are MSPs an increasing vector of attack? Yes, 100%. Particularly in the cloud, where the permissions are often not well understood, where you can have delegated administrative rights to your cloud platform belonging to an MSP who migrated you there. This is Azure, it's Amazon, it's GCP, also the Chinese clouds too. So yeah, 100%. We see this particularly over the last 6 months. MSPs are targeted by nation states. Do we find MSPs violating processes and doing things they shouldn't do? No comment.
Yes, no comment on that. Honestly,
the lawyers won't let me answer that one. Sorry.
Fair enough. No, thanks for taking that though. Yeah, it sounds like there are issues there that organizations need to be aware of. So another question here, which is, if an attacker compromised one of our servers, what are the tools that we can use to determine if the attacker performed some lateral movement? So this is a more specific question. Who would like to answer that first?
Shall I take this one? So like in the Windows space, you'd be looking for tools that perform what we call user entity behavior analytics. So I don't want to sell you in a product, but Defender for Identity, or what we used to call Azure Advanced Threat Protection, would be a fantastic tool that would determine lateral movement across the environment and show lateral movement paths towards what we call domain dominance. You'd also be looking for things where it would highlight specific or suspicious Kerberos things, so pass the hash or overpass the hash or curb roasting. So tools like MDI or other entity behavior analysis tools will do this. And these would feed into your SIEM, be it like Sentinel or Splunk or whatever. There's some really good tooling in this. And of course, good EDR solutions as well, be it Defender endpoint or even, the other things, the CrowdStrikes or whatever in the market, they're all very good tools.
Yeah, and with that said, one of the key vectors you see actually people lateral movement is the typical reimaging process. Somebody will put a password in there for the local admin, and then they won't change it. We actually, for years, we offered this thing called for free Labs, local administrator password system. Is for managing. That basically changes, it randomizes the local admin password on each system. And you can retrieve it through Active Directory to certain people with the privilege to see it. So that way your help desk can still do their things, but they don't have the same password everywhere.
Yeah, local accounts are deadly. 100%.
Yeah.
Great. And another question here, which is less technical, but I really like this question. So it said, would be great to hear more about your personal experiences dealing with the attacks, so mentally, tactically. I know you both discussed some case studies and some of the scenarios that keep you up at night, but I think that's a good question. Like, how do you get in the zone when it comes to, investigating and dealing with some of these attacks?
I think the important thing is to understand you cannot own the customer's pain. I liken myself to an ambulance driver, picking up traffic victims off the road, and I get that it's personally very tragic to people who die in car crashes or ransomware victims, but you cannot own the customer's pain, and there's a level of professional attachment, the same way an ambulance driver does. And the key takeaway is you can only save the willing. You can only go so far to save people.
Yes.
It requires some detachment.
And to add to that, we are, if you think about it, we look at a lot of engagements. We try to see what we can repeat, what process we can make repeatable to eliminate a lot of the variables. And it's like you rehearse a lot, right? So we kind of know, like we get different teams depending on the engagement, but I can trust in everybody in my team is a professional and knows what they're doing. So we all take on it and we have a rehearsed play, and then the variables that we find that don't fit on that play, that we focus more on those. So that way, because when a customer wants us to go in and help them, they're in a state of panic. So they don't want somebody that's gonna help them also be in a state of panic. That's just gonna make the thing worse, right? So we have to be calm and just kind of focus on input output, like a program, input output, and then deal with those variables later.
Yeah. You need to say to the customer, in the first day, it's going to be okay. I know this is a traumatic day for you, but I did 27 of these, and they've all been okay, and you're going to be okay too.
And here, have something.
I can see a lot of analogies to the healthcare space. So we have time for about one more question, and there's one I like here as well, which is another I was going to ask myself, which is, what are some of the top 3 or 5 recommendations that you have for companies to help prepare themselves for an incident? So what are the sort of key advice, key points of advice or takeaways you want to leave the audience?
All right, I could throw one in there, and then Allan can throw another. I would say the big takeaway for me, big win up there is the communication. How do you communicate and your crisis plan with that? Basically, have a plan that if you do discover who that you've been hacked, who are you going to contact? Who is going to be your tiger team that's going to be communicating with leadership, and who's going to be doing what? And do tabletop exercises to practice this communication plan, and also know what are you going to share with the media. You're a big company. You have to have statements ready for this, because having all this removes a lot of the uncertainty and makes you focus more on what's important, which is recovering your environment. Allan, you.
I put a link into the chat here, which is a blog I wrote on the main Microsoft.com website a few months ago, and it's called 7 Ways to Harden Your Environment Against Compromise. So I've already written 7, so I assume everyone can see the chat, so please go read my blog from August this year. But basically the key things are to update and maintain your basic security, patch everything faster, actively protect your devices, reduce your exposure, reduce your privilege, use the cloud, pay down your technical debt. You know, you can't be running out of support stuff, and look at your logs. That's my 7 points from my blog. Yeah, if you think about security as a bell curve, I hope we know what bell curves are, where they go over, up, and down. 99% of attacks happen in the middle. People panic around these kind of funky 0-day, you know, Chinese or Russian things, the 1% edge cases. Most attacks use vectors that have been known for years, 3, 4, 5 years. Pass the hash is what, 10 years old, 11 years old? But it happens every day because it still works. Focus on the basics, focus on, you know, the middle of the bell curve. And when you're happy there, you pay down your technical debt, then you can push out to the kind of less likely scenarios. Too many people get focused on this new super vulnerability that isn't really being exploited, and ignore, you know, the 23 things in the environment that have been exploited every day.
Yes. I will say, right, because I've been in companies and places, right, on the other side, that it's a lot of technical debt, right? If there's one thing you can take away and do right now through this talk, is not only set up your communication plan, but also talk to your CISO, talk to your leadership and say, okay, let's set up like maybe 10% of time that IT folks, operations and all that we can set up for security every month. 10% of the time, that's just 10%, right? That's breaks and all that, right? And just let's tackle like the big, there's this thing saying 20-80, like there's 20% of things that cause 80% of the problems, right? Let's start tackling those and kind of spread them out. Same with like doing the practice, just 10% of your time. Just say, agree on this and I'll be happy, and negotiate, right? You can get more.
The best CISOs are the ones who prepare for this.
Yes.
You don't want to become the outgoing CISO at an incident.
Yes.
Or the former CISO.
Great. No, that sounds like some fantastic advice. And before we round it off, do either of you or both of you have any announcements or anything you want to share regarding Microsoft, your teams? Are you, you know, expanding in Japan or APAC? Anything you want to share with the audience here today and those that may be watching the recording later?
We're definitely hiring.
Yeah, we hire.
Go to careers.microsoft.com, and, you know, this thing's coming up soon. Certainly at the start of January, I know we're hiring in region. We're desperately always looking for good security talent.
Yes, definitely. And reach out, you know what, reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, please.
And I have always things going on, and reach out, hey, Sam, how can I learn? I'll be more than happy to help you learn or get ready, or if you're looking for something like that, I'm more than glad. I like to get people in my team that are really passionate about this, because it's a war. I need somebody to have my back, right?
Sounds good. And I, you know, I apologize. I can go through all the questions, but like Samuel and Allan said, you know, do reach out to them via LinkedIn, and you know, I'm sure some of the questions will be, you know, that they'll be able to handle. If not, you can use Bing and search for the answers yourselves. So yeah, thanks everyone today for joining, and especially thanks to Allan down in New Zealand, and Samuel here in you're in Yokohama, right? Kanagawa.
Yes, I'm in Kanagawa, Sagamihara.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Yes, thank everyone again. Gino, do you have any final things you want to say as we've just hit the hour?
No, I thought that was an amazing panel. Obviously, you guys, are really good at what you do, and obviously, you guys work together. I thought that was very, very seamless in the discussion. So I thought that was awesome, and I think, like I said earlier, thank you for you guys, lending your expertise and your time. I'm sure the people who attended are really happy, and obviously I'm sure people will be reaching out to you guys based on the questions that were asked. So I'm sure that there will be more discussions, and this is why we do these events, so that we can connect experts like you guys to other people in the industry. So big thanks to you guys, and hopefully to everybody else in the room. We can we're still like 50-50 on arranging something in person. I'm sure Soto will be there when we do that, and maybe
Yes.
Allan at some point. That would be nice to, to have a cold one with you at some point. But yeah, I think, thank you to everybody, in the room, and, we're going to keep on, arranging events, and it's very organic here. So if there's anybody that you think would be interested in speaking to us, or having, somebody on the panel, like, Soto's like exactly a product of that. And, we'd love to, involve as many people as possible. So yeah, thanks for everybody. I'll let, the people in the room, go to their lunches, and, we'll announce our next event soon, and we'll publish this recording as soon as possible.
Yeah, and Happy New Year and happy holidays to everyone as well, because I'm not sure we'll be doing another event before the end of the year. So.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, just give me a few.